Spence, good to have you on, man. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, guys. That panel was super fun, right?
Yeah.
I'm really glad that we got to squeeze in Chainsaw Man, One Punch Man, Kaiju number 8. I was really just feeling a whole lot of cybersecurity support in that. It was great.
Yeah, super fun.
Well, hey, I know you've got some incredible stuff lined up with Active Directory, and you do have a workshop, a full-blown session and things to kind of walk through, some virtual machines that are spun up. Do you need any more time, my friend? Would we like to take the couple minutes until the official half-hour mark? Or do you want to just kind of dive in? I don't know if we're getting started early is good or bad, but what do you think?
Yeah, whatever's good for you guys. I am good to go and start talking about Active Directory stuff. But if you want to do breaks or banter or whatever else, that's cool too. So
I'm waiting to hear from the chat, see if anyone's got any input. But I think we'll lean towards, hey, we'll let you run with it, my friend.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I tend to elaborate, so a couple more minutes probably wouldn't hurt me.
Excellent. Great to hear it.
We're going to pop off. It's all yours, man.
All right. Can you guys see? Can I share my screen?
Yeah, I think you might have. Let me go ahead and pull that up for you. Apologies.
No, good. Okay, I just want to make sure we're all good there.
All righty.
Rock and roll.
Have some fun, my friend.
Cool. Awesome. Appreciate it, guys. Super cool. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I will try my best to not get distracted too much by chat. But if anybody sees me going off the rails, just yell at me. So welcome to Killing Active Directory Attack Paths Once and For All. This is going to be super fun. I like to start out, and you might have, if you follow me on social media, you might have seen me talk about this topic many times before. But something I wanted to point out before we get into attack paths and what they are is just talk a little bit about Active Directory. So this screenshot is actually from the Hybrid Identity Protection podcast by Semperis. They had a guy on named Cliff Fisher. If anybody knows who that is, he's like the GOAT of Active Directory. Spent a long time at Microsoft working on Active Directory, and he was on a podcast, and he shared some of these statistics. And I thought this was really interesting and kind of worth sharing some stats around Active Directory and how many organizations still use it. So 86% of organizational workloads still touch Active Directory in some way, which is pretty crazy when you think about the number of just US-based organizations. And the other thing I thought was interesting is that only 53% of organizations expect to get to 50-50, meaning they're going to be kind of hybrid on-prem and Entra within the next 5 years, and then only 19% in the next 10 to 20 years, which is pretty staggering in my opinion. And one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for Active Directory and learning how to both attack and defend Active Directory is because there's still quite a bit of businesses just in the United States alone that are of the size of what you would expect would have an Active Directory environment. So what is an attack path? This workshop is going to cover two specific attack paths, and we're going to talk about attacking and defending, that's a cool word. Defending, rather. So an attack path is just a route an attacker can take in an environment. In the context of Active Directory, it would be the route from like the initially compromised user or the computer to some target. Maybe that's a domain controller, maybe that's a backup server. But the path that they take and the abuses that they use or the vulnerabilities kind of compromise it or is what we consider the attack path. And there can be multiple different steps. It can vary in scope and complexity. It can be quite elaborate as well, or it could be quite simple. And the example that I have created in this workshop is you are the attacker and the defender, but in the case of the attacker, you have compromised Suzy in Accounting's workstation. And Suzy in Accounting is known for clicking on links and downloading cute cat wallpapers and things like that. So there's an attacker that compromises Suzy's workstation. And unfortunately, there's an IT admin that had previously logged into that workstation, and now they have some credentials in memory here, specifically Kerberos tickets. We're going to show how an attacker can use those Kerberos tickets for lateral movement to domain controller. And then we're going to show how we can essentially shut that down by using something called authentication policies and silos. So this is a very realistic attack scenario. It's also very simple, right? You compromise one machine, there's a domain admin logged in, and you can kind of take that and run with it. Of course, not all attack paths are that simple. and they can be quite complex and quite fun. This, of course, is the fun part. So for anybody listening, I think it gets more boring as the talk goes on. So when it comes to attack paths, you need a few things. Specifically, all this is going to be in relation to Active Directory and kind of on-prem environments. So with cloud and web apps and things like that, these prerequisites are kind of different. But for Active Directory, you need access, right? You need a threat actor has to get into the environment. It's called initial access. This is typically through social engineering, like the guys and Rachel and Juno talked about in the keynote there. How social engineering is very prevalent, and it's like the number one way threat actors get in. You need some sort of access. And then you need credentials, because typically many threat actors are going to try and ransomware in the environment, right? Like that's a big existential threat to many businesses. So they need credentials to do that typically. So domain admin or some admin credentials that they can get to a point where they can deploy their ransomware across the environment. An example that we're going to use in this workshop is Kerberos tickets, and we have a password on a file share as well, which is super fun. So that's what we're going to use in the workshop. As far as targets go, the threat actor needs something to kind of go after, right? Not only do they need access, they need credentials, but they need something to go after. Many cases that might be like a backup server to like delete the backups or render them encrypted or go after those. Could be a domain controller so they can kind of dump the entire ntds.database from a domain controller. So they need a target. And then they need weak or missing defensive controls. Because one of the things that I'm going to showcase in this workshop, in this talk, is that you can have credentials, you can have access, you can have a target, but if you have proper defensive controls in place, it makes it much more difficult to actually carry out that attack and continue to compromise the organization. So in order for these attack paths to take place, you need lacking or missing or weak defensive controls. All right, so we're going to talk about two lateral movement attacks in this talk and in this workshop. The first is pass a ticket, and then the second one is PS remoting. These are just lateral movement techniques that a threat actor can use, again, once they've gotten access to the environment. And then, like I said, we're going to use authentication policies and authentication policy silos to show how you can eliminate these two specific attacks, this specific scenario. So before we get too far into the attacks, we do need to talk about Kerberos real quick. So Kerberos is really cool. It's really in the weeds as well, and it can get very detailed. And there's been a lot of research and documentation around Kerberos and Kerberos abuses. But Kerberos, at a high level, is an authentication mechanism for Active Directory. One of the key things to note is that the KDC is the domain controller, and that's what's responsible for authenticating the user, handing out these keys or these tokens, these tickets. And then we have tickets. Tickets are these temporary authentication tokens, if you will, and they are issued by the KDC, and you can get tickets for accessing the domain and for accessing specific resources. So for example, if you want to access the domain controller over maybe like the $C share, you go / domain controller name $C, that's going to use a specific Kerberos ticket. And that's going to be called CIFS, which we have down here below. So there's two types of tickets in general that we're going to talk about in this workshop and in this talk. First is TGT. I mentioned that already, and that just gives the user, or that allows the user to be authenticated in the domain. The TGS, which is the ticket granting service ticket, often called service ticket, is a specific type of ticket, and that allows you to authenticate to or using specific services. So for example, CIFS is for file share access, HTTP is for web apps, we have LDAP, we have host. So there's different services in Active Directory. You can have different tickets or service tickets for those services. And in the workshop, we're going to abuse specifically the CIFS service. So there's a couple different ways that attackers can get these tickets. You can obviously dump them from memory after you've compromised a machine, where an administrator has logged in. But you can also abuse Kerberos delegation. So there's things called like unconstrained and constrained and resource-based delegation. You can also do things like Kerberosting. That one's a pretty popular one. And then you can also forge your own tickets if you happen to compromise the domain controller. So if you compromise the DC and you dump the hash of the KRB TGT, you can now kind of create your own tickets, often called golden tickets. There's silver tickets, lots of tickets. Everything is tickets, which is super fun with Kerberos. So we're going to look at pass the ticket, and we're going to look at PS remoting. And I'm going to show in this next section here, I'm going to show pass the ticket attack, kind of how it's working, and PS remoting, and we're going to talk about kind of defenses. So pass the ticket is essentially where you steal a ticket and you use that to authenticate to a service without needing the password. And this is very common, commonly used for lateral movement, but you can assume like privilege escalation as well occurs as a result of this. So this is just one way to compromise an account to move laterally in an environment, again, without necessarily needing the password for the account that you're targeting. PS remoting is a special kind of built-in utility in Windows on specifically servers. It's enabled by default. And PS remoting uses this cool stuff underneath, Windows management or WS management WinRM. But essentially, it allows you to create a remote PowerShell session on a remote host. So you can fire up a new PowerShell session and connect to that. And really, the only prerequisite is that WinRM PS remoting is enabled, and that you have local administrative rights on that remote host. So this is most commonly seen on servers because it's enabled by default there. But though the PS remoting attack requires credentials in the case of the workshop, but once you pass the ticket, you can actually use PS remoting. So there's a couple different ways that you can kind of carry out these attacks, which is kind of neat. So for the sake of not like messing up any live demos, I have recorded this. But quick note on the lab environment. The lab environment has 3 machines. It's got a DC, it's got a server, and it's got a PC. So the domain controller, that's where Active Directory lives. The server is kind of like an admin server. And then PC01 is Susie and Accounting's workstation. Now we are approaching this from an assume breach kind of perspective. This is like assume a threat actor has compromised Susie and they have, like RDP access or maybe access through an RMM kind of thing. So we're treating this kind of assume breach style to keep this kind of simple. The other thing I want to mention before I talk about the attacks is there are a number of ways to identify attack paths in Active Directory. Probably the most well-known tool is Bloodhound. That is probably the definitive example. When you talk about Active Directory attack paths, you can't not talk about Bloodhound and the work that the folks at SpecDrops and all those guys have done for both Powersploit and kind of the early stage of this, and then Bloodhound and all of the great stuff that's come out of that. But there's super cool other tools as well that maybe people haven't heard of, specifically Pingcastle. And Pingcastle, I recognize people might have heard of this one, but there's a specific section in a Pingcastle report called the control paths section. And this is kind of a graph representation of the environment, kind of similar to what Bloodhound shows you. Not as nice and not as neat and comprehensive as Bloodhound by any means, but it is a nice way to kind of get this graph-based view of the environment. And you can actually see breakdowns and tiering in least privilege by looking at this control paths report. So super neat. Purple Knight, another awesome, great tool by Semperis. ADeleg and ADeleginator. This is an Active Directory delegation management tool. But the thing I really like about ADeleg is it shows you the non-default delegations in the environment. So the definitive example, or like the famous example that I like to use, is when everyone has full control over the root of the domain. That's super crazy, scary. It's happened to me twice now on internal pen tests, and both times the client has had no idea how that happened, where it came from, who did it. But ADeleg can find that super easy. The one requirement for that is that you have to know where to look and what to look for, which we'll talk about at the end. But ADeleginator is just like a wrapper that I wrote around ADeleg to find some of the common low-hanging fruit misconfigured delegations that you see. And then last but not least is Locksmith. Locksmith is probably the, without a doubt, the most comprehensive ADCS, Active Directory Certificate Services auditing tool there ever is, will be, like I put here. But super great, finds all those misconfigurations, which again can lead to attack paths in Active Directory. All right, so we're going to show pass the ticket, and I'm going to show how that works, and then we're going to talk about defenses and kind of how to mitigate this. So hopefully, let me know. I'm going to play this. Hopefully there's audio. So if not, just let me know. Okay, no sound. Got it. I was not prepared for that. It was faint. Okay. All right. So instead of showing you that, because I don't think you're going to be able to hear it, unless I do. Okay. How about now? Okay. No worries. 1 second. Okay. Temporary. Okay. Got it. Okay. So you guys can still hear me though on my mic. Okay, cool. So instead of showing you that video, which I didn't, I messed up the audio. So apologies. There is audio there, but I don't want to monkey with it through Restream. So I'm going to walk you guys through this, through the slides here, the demo guides. Well, I recorded it. I recorded ahead of time, but I didn't test the audio. So we should have tested the audio first for the video, but all good. I'm going to walk you guys through this step by step so you guys can see it. So first step is we're going to log into PC01 as Susie. And Susie is going to try and access the domain controller. And we're just going to run dir DC01 and go to the C$ share. And we can see Susie is not able to access that. And that's because she doesn't have a Kerberos ticket. She hasn't stolen the ticket. She doesn't have access. She's just a regular domain user. Can you guys still hear me through the mic? Just want to make sure. Okay. All right. If you guys can still hear me, I can go through like the actual lab material instead of showing the video. Yeah, it's a restream thing. I think I could do it, but I don't want to monkey it around with it right in midstream here. So we'll continue with this. So Susie is my like definitive, that's like the example I always like to use. I just came up with it one day and then like that was the example that I used. So in this case, we log in as Susie and we try to access the domain controller, the C$ share of the domain controller. Susie is a regular domain user, so of course we can't access the DC. But now we're going to look for administrative tickets in memory on this machine. And like I mentioned earlier, there's an IT admin that had previously logged into this machine. So there's a cool tool called Rubius. This is a Kerberos abuse tool. Quick note, if you try to run this on your machine, it absolutely will get blocked by your EDR and, you know, raise alerts and alert your SOC and all that. This is whitelisted in the lab, so you can run this. So you use Rubius and you run something called triage. And triage shows all the Kerberos tickets here that are in memory. And one caveat to note is that in order to see all of the tickets on the machine, you have to be a local admin. So in this case, the domain users group is members of local administrators, just to make this a little bit easier. That might seem contrived, but I promise you, I've seen this before. This is unfortunately very common. So we run Rubius triage, and we can see all of the tickets in memory here. We can see Susie's tickets, we can see PC01, and we can see IT admin. And IT admin has a number of tickets here, and like I said, it's got a KRB TGT ticket, CIFS, and LDAP, so it's got a couple different here. For the sake of this lab, we're going to abuse the CIFS service ticket. In order to do that, we're just going to run a command to dump the ticket to memory, or dump the ticket from memory. We're going to save it to a text file like we are here. So we dump this using Rubius dump, and we give it a LUD or a LUID, however you like to pronounce that. This is just the identification for that service. So you can see the target LUID or LUD here is 15C57. So it's going to be different in the lab for you. But you just put the LUD in there, and then you finish the command here, and you dump it to a text file. The next step is we get a base64 ticket, and we're going to save that base64 ticket as a Kirby file. And we're going to use, that's what we're going to use and actually pass to perform the pass the ticket attack. So again, in the lab, you can copy and paste this, but it essentially is just creating a Kirby file that we can then pass to Rubius again for pass the ticket. So we save this and we use Rubius pass the ticket, so PTT, and we give it the path to the ticket. And just like that, we import the ticket. Now to verify that that ticket is actually in place, we can just run klist, which lists all the cached Kerberos tickets. And we can see IT admin for server CIFS on DC01. So that ticket was successfully passed. It's now cached in memory for our session. Now all that we have to do is to try to verify access. We just run dir on the DC/C$. And then we do see that we have access to the domain controller. So super cool. All things are working. And we now have access to the domain controller as IT admin. And that is quite literally how simple it can be sometimes to compromise an admin account, compromise a DC. Now we're going to show PS remoting. PS remoting is super cool. Like I said, you can do this already. So once you pass a ticket, you actually can already use PS remoting within this session. And you can just run those commands that are shown down below. In this case, I'm just showing that we are going to get credentials because we're going to use those credentials later to verify that the authentication policies and silos are actually working. So this step is not necessarily needed. You don't necessarily need the credentials, but we're going to use those later. So I figured we would show this a little bit. So there's some file share hunting that's going on here, and we get a password, and then we just try to log in as the one account that we know exists so far in the domain, which is IT admin. And you can see we can log in as IT admin, and now we're running a PowerShell session as that user. PS remoting is super simple and super easy. You just run new PS session, and then you pass a computer name, and then that creates a remote session, and then you can enter that session using enter PS session and then the session ID number. It might not always be one. If you've done this, if you do this a couple times, the number increments, so maybe 2, 3, 4, etc. And then once you're connected, you're actually running commands via a remote PowerShell session. So you can do things like who am I, you can run host name, and you can do some really cool stuff there. And that's really it. That's the passive ticket attack. That's PS remoting. The next step is we're going to talk about lateral movement defense and how do we actually kill these attack paths. So for this, we're going to use authentication policies and authentication policy silos. So this is super cool. This is a technology that was introduced in Server 2012 R2, I believe. And unfortunately, it hasn't really been used a lot. And admittedly, it's for a couple of reasons. One, it's kind of cumbersome to use. But also, it's just, it's kind of been put to the wayside by Microsoft. There hasn't been a ton of investment in this. And it can be a little bit difficult to get set up. And you can run the risk of locking accounts out and kind of, bricking your environment to some extent. But if you do it slowly and methodically, these are super great. So authentication policies just define specific authentication rules. And the silo is kind of like a protected boundary. It's literally a silo or a bubble or a group of defined access. And it defines who or what accounts are allowed to authenticate with that policy that it's attached to. So authentication policies, in this workshop, we're going to specifically create an authentication policy that says that the IT admin account is only allowed to authenticate from SRV01. And that means that if an attacker compromises Susie's workstation and steals a ticket somehow, or maybe gets the credentials for that account, that IT admin account should not be able to authenticate from PC01 or Susie's machine if everything is working correctly. So these can be very powerful, even in the case where the attacker has credential material. They might not be able to use that from the point where they get that credential. So super, super powerful control. Authentication policy silos, again, are the protected boundary, or it's like the bubble or the group of accounts that are allowed to authenticate. So in this case, we're going to be using SRV01 as our IT admin machine. This is going to be the host that IT admin is allowed to authenticate from. And then IT admin is going to be part of that authentication policy silo as well. So that account is going to be able to authenticate from that server SRV01. Now, when we get to the authentication policy and silos, there's two things to keep in mind. One is you have to grant access, and the second thing is you have to assign the silo or assign the accounts to that silo. It's kind of confusing, again, partly why Microsoft people haven't adopted this. All right. So prerequisites for authentication policies and silos. You do need to enable Kerberos armoring and claims. This is one of the things that I think people tripped up on, is that they try to go like full enforcement mode on Kerberos armoring and it ends up bricking their environment. For anybody who has tried this, you've probably run into this. But there's two group policies that you need set at minimum. And I've already configured this for you in the lab, so you don't have to worry about it. But I do go over it in the documentation here so you can see. There is a setting on the default domain controllers policy that you need to set, and one on the default domain policy, or the policy that affects the hosts that are going to be impacted by the authentication policy silos. So I know this is kind of confusing, but one thing that has helped me is just going through and like doing it in a lab like this helps some of these things kind of sink in a little bit better, because you're actually hands-on and kind of messing with stuff. So you do have that group policy that's already set in the lab, like I said, but if you try this in your own environment or your own lab, you will need to make sure that Kerberos support for claims, Kerberos armoring is enabled and configured. Okay, so here's the fun part. Fun part of creating an authentication policy, okay? So there's a couple of ways that you can configure this. One is through the GUI using the Active Directory Administrative Center, or ADAC. I find it to be a little bit confusing and unintuitive and kind of not fun to play around with the GUI. So in this workshop, I show you how to do it with PowerShell. And PowerShell to me is just a little bit more prescriptive. It's a little bit more defined of what is actually going on. And the benefit is you can just copy and paste this instead of like having to click everything in the workshop. So you can do it both ways. I like PowerShell. That's just me. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new group in Active Directory. This group is going to contain one computer, and that computer is going to be SRV01. And this group is what we're going to attach to the authentication policy. So we're going to create a new group, and we're going to add SRV01 to that group. That's like our allowed computers group. So any other computer that we put in that would be part of this authentication policy and silo mechanism. So we just add SRV01 to this security group. The next step is we need to create an SDDL access condition. Now this is like, think of this as just like an access rule. And this rule, I have details here below, but this rule just is saying that members of this allowed computers group have access. So this is just a complicated way of doing it because we're doing it through PowerShell. If you're doing it through the GUI, you just go into the section, you have to click some drop downs and you select the group and it's all well and good. So you follow these steps, you get, you create an access rule, and then that access rule gets applied to the authentication policy. And if you're wondering like what's an SDDL, I have some documentation here and you can learn about this kind of stuff. It is quite confusing at first glance. You're like, what are all these letters and symbols and all that? This is just an access string, and all these letters mean certain things, but essentially it means allow all computers in this group to have access. So now we need to finally create the policy. So we just create a new policy, and this authentication policy is going to prescribe certain TGT, or ticket granting ticket lifetime. So the user is going to have 60 minutes of TGT lifetime. That means a ticket, when the user authenticates, that ticket is going to only live for 60 minutes. And that's one of the things that you can define in an authentication policy. So we create a new policy. We are setting this to enforce as opposed to audit. Now, enforce means like this policy is going to take place. When you do this in your own environment or a lab or something like that, you probably want to set it to audit first and then go through the policy, the audit log, the Windows event log, make sure there's no errors and things like that. But we essentially just create a new authentication policy. And then the authentication policy section is done. And we can run some commands here to verify that everything is set. So we've created a new group. We added SRV01 to that group. We created an access string. We assigned that to the authentication policy. And then we created the authentication policy. So that piece is good. The second part is creating an authentication policy silo. Now this is where we're going to attach IT admin and SRV01 to this whole thing. So the first step is creating this silo. We create the silo, we mark it as enforce. Again, same kind of like disclaimers about audit mode and things like that. This is a lab environment, so we're gonna have fun and YOLO it. So we're gonna set it to enforce. Now, here is one of the tricky parts. We need to, if you remember what I said earlier, we need to grant access and then we need to assign that access or assign that silo essentially. So first is we grant access to the silo here. So we put IT admin and SRV01, we grant them access to this silo. So this is how they get attached to this the silo. So that's both for IT admin and SRV01. The next two steps are to assign them to the silo. Again, why Microsoft chose to do it this way, I'm not exactly sure, but you do have to grant access and then you use a set command to essentially assign these two accounts to that policy. You grant them access, you assign them part of the policy, and then those steps are good. So now we can run verifications again using some of these commandlets. And all this does is going to show us specific information related to the silo that we just created. So we created an authentication policy silo. We added IT admin and SRV01 to it. We assigned them to that silo. So now we're good. So now we've got the authentication policy. We've got the authentication policy silo. We added SRV01 to our allowed computers group. So we have all of the components necessary to kind of go and test this. Now you can verify through the GUI as well if you like ADAC and you like GUI stuff. The one requirement for testing this is you want to make sure that you force a group policy update. Because we enable Kerberos armoring and because there are some authentication mechanisms going on, it's a good idea just to do a reboot or a group policy update before you try to test this. The other reason is because back on PC01, if we go and try and use that ticket right now, because it's within that 60 minutes, that ticket will still work. So we just set up this policy, but that ticket is still valid because there was no policy set before that. So if we go back and we try to use that, we will be able to use that ticket. So by rebooting everything, we're going to start from a clean slate, and then we'll be able to show that, yeah, once we reboot, we log back in as Susie, we can actually see that there's no tickets there. So that's essentially what we're doing. We're going to reboot all the lab machines, make sure group policy is updated, and then we're going to go back and test. So again, we can check IT admin or we can check for this ticket. So again, we're going to run PowerShell as an administrator, and then we're going to run Ruby as triage, same thing we did in the beginning of this. And we're going to see there are no tickets here for IT admin. So we can see we are still local admin. We can see all the other tickets, but there's no ticket for IT admin, which is a good first sign. To further validate this, we can go to the task scheduler. So we can run task schd from command prompt or from that PowerShell session to launch the task scheduler. And we just click on task scheduler, and then we click on this lab Kerberos ticket keep alive task. This is actually what I have baked into the lab so that every few minutes a command runs so that that IT admin ticket is always in memory for you to steal in the first part of the lab. So you go in here, you click on the task, and you can try and run it, and you'll see that it errors. It'll say in the description, error, last run failed. But then if you open up the task and you try and enter in the credentials again for the IT admin, and then you hit OK, you'll see this message that says, hey, this user isn't allowed to sign in from this computer. It's like, cool. So what this is saying is that even with an IT admin password, we're not able to reinitiate or rerun the scheduled task. Like, that's awesome. The next thing is, well, let's see if we can access the C $share. So same thing, kind of thing. We can open Explorer. We can go to the C $share and enter in the credentials for the IT admin. And again, similar thing. It says you might not have permission to use this from the network. User is not allowed to log on from this workstation. Like, great, super cool. Now maybe we want to try RDP. So again, with the IT admin credentials in hand, we open up RDP. You can use, you can just hit the start button, search for remote desktop, click connect, enter in DCO1 here. You click use a different account, and then you put in the IT admin credentials. And when you hit OK, again, it tells us the system administrator is limited to computers you can log on with. Try logging on from a different computer or at a different computer. So great. We've tried looking for tickets. We tried the C $share with credentials. We tried RDP with the credentials. All of those have failed from PCO1. Now we're going to try from the machine that we specified was going to be allowed in this authentication policy in Silo, which is SRV01. So quick caveat is that because our lab environment uses Guacamole for RDP, we can't actually define that in our authentication policy in Silo very easily. So what we need to do is we just need to log in to SRV01 as SRV admin. And then we're going to do a run as, and this is going to allow us to test that authentication is in fact working on SRV01 as the IT admin. So that's essentially what we do here is we log into SRV01, and then we bring up a command prompt and we use this run as command. This run as command is saying, we want to run a new command, which is PowerShell. We want to run it as IT admin. And then you enter in the credentials for the IT admin. And if everything is working correctly, it should bring up this additional PowerShell window. It says running as IT admin. And then if you do who am I, we are in fact IT admin. So great, authentication policy works. It doesn't work on PCO1 where it has been denied or not allowed by the policy rather, but it does work on SRV01. So super, super great. Now, for the sake of like the lab environment, I have put all of the scripts and everything on the machines. So you can find them in like C tools or C lab in the lab environment, like on the actual machine. So you can just copy and paste these or just open these up and run them. And I've created these scripts for you to both set up and revert the lab environment. So what's cool about this is you can like create your own machines or create your own accounts and things like that and like log in with those and kind of test and play around with this more if you'd like. And these are scripts to set up and revert the lab environment. Cool. So the last step is really like, how do you find these attack paths kind of thing? And just like a quick 5-minute kind of summary of building attack paths and what to focus on. So from my opinion, my perspective, I always like to look for low-hanging fruit first. And I like to look for permissions. That's one of the easiest things to see that are messed up in Active Directory because some things are quite obvious. So if you look at everyone, authenticated users, domain users, etc., those are what I call unsafe users or unsafe groups. And it would be unusual for them to have elevated rights in the environment. So I like to start with those low privilege groups, those unsafe users. And then conversely, you can start with like your most privileged resources. So your domain controllers, certificate authorities, admin accounts, SCCM servers, and any other like high privilege groups. So look at the low privilege stuff and the high privilege stuff and essentially look for dangerous things. And I use dangerous loosely because it could be permission related, it could be security group related, it could be certificate properties related. But essentially, you want to look for things that are dangerous. And like I said, permissions is a good one to start out with. So looking for things like full control and write modify or DC sync privileges, things like that is a good place to start. And then lastly, not all attack paths are going to be permissions or Kerberos related. Some of those are going to be credentials. Some of those are going to be where admins are logged into untrusted systems, overprivileged groups, certificates, etc. Once you kind of dig into attack paths, you begin to realize that you just see like attack paths everywhere, like this meme. And for anybody who's pen tested or looked at this stuff, probably has the same kind of feeling. Is like this stuff is everywhere. And then lastly, my advice is to document that stuff. Create kind of a risk register of these attack paths in your environment and assign some severity or priorities to them. And then assign some ownership to them and have some of the IT team kind of go after those and tackle those in kind of a prioritized way. And specifically, I would focus on the severity of the issue and the impact of the remediations. So if it's really easy to exploit, like a ESC1 certificate abuse thing, but it's really difficult to remediate, maybe that's not the first thing you go after. Maybe there's some low-hanging fruit that's high severity, but you can get rid of it quite easily. That's kind of how I would approach it, is look at the severity of the issue and the ease of exploitation and look at the remediation impact to your environment and try to tackle it in some order that makes sense there. And then the last most important step is to retest. I can't stress this enough that I've done internal pen testing a lot, and it always hurts to see when we do a pen test, the client goes and fixes things, and then we come back and it's not quite fixed or it's not fixed at all. The bread and where you kind of like earn your keep, so to speak, is fixing these things, but then retesting to make sure that those issues are fixed to begin with. Make sure you haven't introduced any other issues, or make sure that the fix is really just complete. So that is kind of like my key takeaways. So that's really it. It's build an attack path, prioritize those things, get those things fixed, and fix those in your environment. So that's it. I'm gonna leave like 5 or 10 minutes. Hopefully I was on time. But I think that's it. So I'm gonna go back here. Yeah.
Excellent stuff, Spencer. Thank you.
Yeah, what an awesome workshop over here, packed with insight on Active Directory. I think this is going to be really useful. I saw people in chat too. They were really, really enjoying this one.
Yeah, so I totally spaced that I had videos and I was going to show the videos. Then I didn't test the audio, and like when we were like, oh, should we like talk shop or like take a break? Like I should have been like, oh yeah, I should test the audio. Like I'm an idiot. So
no worries at all.
Hopefully that was still good for everybody.
We were starting to scheme up and wonder, I wonder, is it like on your screen share? I think maybe the audio source, you might have had it set to like a chat mic, but I wonder if we were to put it to default, if it would come through. We could experiment. We could try it. I don't know if you want to at this point, but
I'll try on my own, so I know for next time. Unless you guys want me to try it now, I definitely can for like anybody else who's coming next. So I'm happy to be a guinea pig for that regard.
What say you, Anthony? Do we need the guinea pig?
I kind of like experimenting. That's okay. Gives people some time to start rolling some questions as well too. It looked like it was going to be a really good video to share, Spence. So I'm happy to.
The video was essentially everything I talked through, just like obviously more interactive. But, I'm happy to take questions too. So let me try.
Yeah. In the meantime, Spence is queuing up that audio video test. Everyone in chat, if you have questions about the workshop, about his experience, about anything Active Directory, start queuing it up. He will be happy to answer.
Well, I'm loading a couple
of Active Directory attack paths once and for all.
I think I hear audio.
I do hear audio. So now we just need video.
and our echo has returned, but that's a-okay. That's fine.
Yeah. Add
All right, I
scene.
got your
Okay.
screen share.
Can you still hear me on my mic?
It's an
Yes.
echo, but I guess if we stop talking, we should be able to hear the video, right?
I can also mute myself too.
Now we don't hear it when you're muted.
Nope. It's actually, yeah, we don't hear it at all anymore. It was
Okay.
worth a shot. Sorry about
Uh,
that, Spence.
I think it works when you are not muted. So we just need Anthony and I to shut up and stop talking.
Yeah, no worries. Actually, let me go to this one, and I think it might be picking it up on my mic too. So the first thing what we're going to do is we are going to run PowerShell as an administrator. So that worked, right?
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I'll go on mute.
Do you want to run this now? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean,
Or
this
I know
this
you
one
covered
is
it
like
already.
3 minutes, and then the next one, like the defensive side, is like longer. It's like 12 or 13 minutes. So I don't know if we'll have time for that one, but I can show this one if you want.
Please, let's do it.
Yeah.
So we're gonna right click on PowerShell. We're gonna click Run as Administrator, and then when we see this UAC prompt, we're just gonna select Yes, and this gives us a administrative PowerShell prompt. Now, just to prove that we don't already have access to the domain controller as this user, we're going to say dir dco1.eureka.corp/$. And this is the $C share on DC01, and we can see access denied. So this user, who is Susie, does not have access to the domain controller currently. Now we're going to cd to C tools, and then we're going to run rubius.exe. And a little helpful tip is if you start typing the letters and then you hit tab on your keyboard, autocomplete should select the next file in line. So we're going to run rubius.exe triage. And what this does is it shows us all the Kerberos tickets in memory. And because we run this as a local administrator, we're able to see all the tickets. If we were to run this just as a regular user, we'd only see the tickets for that current user. So we can see here, IT admin has KRB TGT service, CIFS, LDAP. We see Susie, we see PCO1, which is this machine. So we do in fact see this IT admin account has some Kerberos tickets here in memory. So now that we see that there's an IT admin ticket in memory, what we're going to do is we're going to steal that IT admin CIFS ticket. And if you remember from the coursework, CIFS is for SMB file sharing. So what this is going to do is we're going to dump using the rubius.exe dump command, and then we're going to need the LUID or the LUID of that CIFS session for the IT admin, and we're going to run /service CIFS for server DC01 and some no wrap stuff, and we're going to dump this to a text file. So the only thing we need to change is this section right here in these angled brackets. We need to put the actual LUID or LUD, however you like to say that. So I'm going to type this in, and this is what we got from Rubius triage from the earlier command. So we're going to run this. Great. So here's the base 64 encoded ticket, and we have saved it to itadmin cifs dump.txt. Now we're going to copy and paste it in the next command, which is going to extract the base 64 ticket and save it as a .kirby file. And this is so we can use it later on if we want to re-inject the Kerberos ticket into our session. Great, so that worked. So now we can see we've got this Kirby file. So now that we have the Kerberos ticket saved into a Kirby file, we can now pass this ticket into our current session, essentially impersonating that IT admin account. So again, we're going to be run Rubius, and we're going to say PTT for pass the ticket, and then we're going to do /ticket, and we're going to put the path to that Kirby file, that Kerberos ticket file that we just generated. Okay, great. Ticket has been imported successfully. Now we can verify that the ticket has actually been imported by running klist, and we can see IT admin at Eureka Corp for CIFS on DC01. Now all that's left is to try accessing DC01 on the $C share, which is the C drive of the DC. And look at that. There's the $C$ of the DC, and we can see the file contents there. So we know the pass the ticket attack worked. So the first thing we're going to do, okay.
Excellent.
Cool.
It worked.
Thank you for testing with
Yeah.
us. I know it's fun. Oh, doing it live, but hey, yeah, we're keeping it real.
Yeah, totally.
Good.
Totally. Like I said, the defensive one is like 12, 13 minutes, so probably not time for that one. But it is all in the coursework stuff, so people can go and check that out, hopefully, and it's super fun. But yeah, authentication policy styles are great if you can get through the cumbersomeness and annoyingness of them.
We have a couple awesome questions rolling in. If you're willing.
Yeah. We can bring it up on the stream too. We can
totally.
Can you highlight that? You should be able to, right?
Yeah, if you click on any of them, I'm hoping, I don't know, either Anthony or me, either one. But
I cannot, unfortunately. Unless because one is
the
pinned.
one from Superlink?
I think it is, yeah. Superlink, yes. This is
Okay.
siloed using AD. Yeah, that one.
Okay, so question is, this is siloed using AD auth domain user admin with endpoint restrictions via, again, AD. Assume this is all for a defense lab to show ways to micro access minimize attack vectors. So yeah, exactly. The whole point of this this lab, this workshop, is to show that even with credentials, even with credential material, this authentication policy and authentication policy silo control or mechanism can prevent lateral movement and authentication with that account. So it's super cool that, I first discovered this on a pen test. A client had this set up, and we were like trying to pass the ticket and pass the hash and other password attacks and certificate of use, and nothing worked because these policies and silos were in place. So that's kind of the goal, is even if there are credential material that have been compromised, you can potentially mitigate or eliminate these lateral movement privilege escalation attack paths. Harrison Wells, Spencer, this looks too hard for enterprise. Should I just buy Silverfort? I'm a big fan. I think Silverfort is also equally as difficult to set up as authentication policies and silos. The benefit, though, of something like Silverfort is you can put MFA on those other protocols. So that's the really cool part, is like Kerberos, NTLM, LDAP, SMB, like all those different protocols and mechanisms you can actually enforce MFA on. So something like that is really cool for that reason. But same kind of issues can apply there, where you could like accidentally lock out your accounts and completely mess up your environment. So you have to be, very disciplined about it. But those can work really well. What's the point in this attack if the guy was launching all these programs from an admin shell? So the scenario was attacker compromises Susie's machine. Susie's a local admin, but she's not a domain admin. So she's just a local admin. But because she's a local admin, she can dump all the Kerberos tickets in memory. And she sees that an IT admin had previously logged on to that system. And because she's a local admin, she can dump all those Kerberos tickets and steal that admin's Kerberos ticket because it's been in memory, it's been cached. Yeah, you definitely want to make sure you have proper break glass set up. And obviously you can set up these policies in silos in audit mode. And audit mode means it's not going to enforce it or block access. And then you just turn on the auditing, the logging on the DC, and you go in the event viewer, and then you can see all of the failed authentications and things like that. So you can make sure that you don't break anything before you actually turn this stuff on to enforcement mode. Awesome.
Sweet. Good questions. Thank you very much, Spencer.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was super fun being the first solo presenter.
Hey, you brought some real hands-on, practical, application-based learning and Active Directory that always needs some love. So seriously, genuinely, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I like to set the bar low, and it's just going to only be better from here, everybody.
No, you were fantastic.
Oh, that
I saw a
was
couple
amazing,
Yeah, I saw some tweets going off on Twitter like, man, Spencer's a professional. He does it for real. He's great.
Yeah, man.
I appreciate it, guys.
Thanks
Thanks for having me. This has been super fun.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Spencer.